Who were the Spanishblaudivision? Well, they were a Spanish volunteer force whose goal was to help Germany fight Communist Russia, as Spain's leader Franco did not want to bring all of Spain into World War II. It was far easier to use this token force of volunteers to appease Hitler and his allies and keep Spain out of harm's way and not to incur the wrath of the Allied powers, but at the same time keep hardcore fascists in Spain happy by supporting Hitler. The formation began on the 26th of June 1941, 2 days after Germany declared war on the Soviet Union, and recruitment for volunteers began the 27th, a day later. The first formations created totaled 18,077 men and would eventually involve up to 70,000 Spaniards, with a peak of around 47,000 being the most that served in a single time in their units. They would then serve as the 250th Division of the 16th German Army, and become known as the Spanishblaudivision due to the wearing of their blue shirts, hence Blaudivision being blur for, blue division. A large amount of the recruits were young men from universities, as fascism tended to cater to the educated classes. Also, many veterans of the Spanish Civil War, who fought for the nationalist side against the Republican communists, were eager to punish the Russians for their support, which they had given to the Spanish Republican forces in the form of economic and military support. This was also where the common slogan comes, "We pay the Russians a return visit," which the Spanishblaudivision regularly used. There were also enough volunteer pilots for 5 fighter squadrons to be created, which were incorporated into the Luftwaffe, and 22 Spanish pilots were able to shoot down over 156 Soviet planes during their time in the war, which is very impressive. After training in Bavaria for several months, the ground forces were then armed and equipped by the German army, and soldiers of the Blur Division were sent to the Eastern Front in Russia. They arrived in October 1941. At first, the German forces had very little respect for the Spanish forces, saying they were ill-disciplined and would rather chase women and joke around than fight. But then they were sent to serve with Army Group Center to attack Moscow, but were immediately reassigned to help with the siege of Leningrad with Army Group North. They had many early successful battles, such as the taking of Dubrovka and repelling multiple Russian counterattacks. This earned them a ferocious reputation, and they became highly respected by the German allies, and even Hitler saying they were comparable to even the most elite German soldiers, also being feared by the Russian enemies. But they also had defeats as well, such as the loss of 758 men out of 800 when ambushed by Russians at a river crossing in 1942. But this did not deter the warriors of the Blur Division, though it only emboldened them to hate the Russians even more and to become more brutal with their tactics, even employing torture on captured enemies and to mutilate the bodies to spread terror within the communist ranks. It was even said the Blur Division was so well known for fighting to the last man that trying to take captives was pointless, as they did not fear death. As spring arrived in 1942 and the Germans attempted to push back Russian forces all across the front lines, the Blur Division took part in many brutal battles, such as the Battle of Mole Shamoshi, in which they killed over 5,000 Russians for a loss of only 274 of their own. And of course, the legendary Battle of Krasny Bor, where Spanish forces were outnumbered 7-1. They lacked tanks, cannons, and air support, whereas the Russians had multiple armoured companies with artillery and air support, and they attacked the Blur Division with extreme ferocity, but the Blur Division was able to repel them and inflict over 9,000 casualties on the Russians for only 2,252 losses of their own in a single day, which given the circumstances was an insanely successful defence. But as time went on and casualties started to mount in the Blur Division, and Allied pressure started to build against Spain due to the progress against Germany and its allies, Franco had to then declare neutrality and pull all Spanish soldiers abroad home. So on November 3rd, 1943, Spain gave the order for all Spanish troops to return home. But over 3,000 Spaniards refused this order and were then integrated into various German army and SS units to carry on the fight, many taking part in anti-partisan duties in Yugoslavia, being very effective, and some even present at the Battle of Berlin, still fighting the communist foe to the very end. By the end of the war, the total casualties taken by the Blur Division were as follows: 5,000 dead, 8,000 wounded, and the hundreds of missing or taken prisoner. But they accounted for the destruction of over 126,000 Russians in combat, meaning for every Spaniard that fell, they took 12 with them, which is astonishing. They also won an extremely large amount of medals and accolades for such a small unit, or group of soldiers, shall I say. 2 German Knight Crosses won, 2 Golden Crosses, 2,497 Iron Crosses, 138 being first class, and 2,260 Military Merit Crosses, and 16 being first class, and also many other smaller medals. So all in all, the Spanishblaudivision was an extremely capable fighting force which surprised allies and enemy alike, and to this day are relatively unknown to most people. But I hope in this video I've opened your eyes to some of the history and the ferocity with which they fought, making them true warriors of war, in my opinion. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and I wish you a fantastic day.